Today we're diving into the fundamentals of biology, which really means we're looking at the chemistry of life. Everything alive, from the tiniest plankton drifting in the ocean to the largest blue whale, depends on the same molecular building blocks. This chapter connects the chemical world with the biological world, showing us how small molecules can create entire living systems. As we go through, keep in mind that the same principles apply across all living life, land, sea, or air, but we'll focus on the matters in marine organisms. When we talk about the foundations of life, we're really talking about the four major organic molecules: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. These molecules all contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but they're all arranged differently, and those arrangements determine their functions. You can think of them like a toolkit. Each one does something unique. Together, they give organisms energy, allow them to grow, build structures, and pass information from one generation to the next. Without these four groups, life as we know it would simply could not exist. Carbohydrates are probably the most familiar to us since we think of them as sugars and starches. Chemically, they follow the 1-to-1 ratio of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Glucose is the classic example. It fuels the cells runs on. Some carbohydrates provide immediate energy, while others are stored as starch in plants and algae for later use. Beyond energy, carbohydrates can also play structural roles. Cellulose forms the tough walls of plants and seaweed, and chitin builds the shells of crabs, lobsters, and shrimp. So carbs aren't just food, they're also building material. Proteins are much more versatile. They're made from smaller units called amino acids, and the way those amino acids are arranged changes the protein does. Some proteins are enzymes that act like catalysts, speeding up chemical reactions that would otherwise happen too slow to support life. Others are hormones serving as messengers that allow cells and tissues to communicate. And of course, proteins can be structural too. Think about the muscle fibers or collagen in connective tissue. In many ways, proteins are the workers of the cell. They build, repair, communicate, and make life run smoothly. Lipids behave differently because they don't mix well with water, and that makes them especially useful for marine life. Many marine mammals, like whales and seals, rely on thick layers of fat, also known as blubber, to insulate them in cold water. Birds and otters coat their feathers and fur with oils, which are lipids that make them waterproof and trap heat. Lipids are also important for buoyancy, helping organisms float more easily. On top of that, they're excellent for long-term energy storage. So lipids are not just about fats, they're about the survival in some of the ocean's most extreme conditions. Nucleic acids are probably the most famous molecules because they carry out the code of life. DNA and RNA are both nucleic acids, made from smaller units called nucleotides. DNA is the molecule of heredity, which means that it holds the instructions for building proteins, which in turn carry out nearly every function in the body. RNA helps carry out those instructions. So while proteins do the work, nucleic acids are like the blueprints and the messengers. Every trait, from the color of the fish's scales to the enzymes that allow algae to photosynthesize, is ultimately encoded in its DNA. Life requires energy, and in the ocean, much of that energy comes from sunlight. Though photosynthesis, plants, algae, and other autotrophs capture sunlight using pigments like chlorophyll, that energy is used to make carbohydrates from carbon dioxide, with oxygen being released as a byproduct. In other words, photosynthesis not only provides food for the autotrophs itself, but it also produces oxygen that supports countless other organisms, including us. It is no exaggeration to say that the marine photosynthesis helps power the entire planet. Of course, whether an organism makes its own carbohydrates through photosynthesis or eats another organisms to get them, it still needs to break down those carbohydrates for energy. That process is called cellular respiration. During cellular respiration, cells use oxygen to release energy from glucose, producing carbon dioxide and water as a byproduct. This cycle of photosynthesis and respiration is one of the most important biological loops on Earth. Plants and algae make oxygen and carbohydrates. Animals and many microbes use them for energy and return carbon dioxide back to the system. Some of the carbohydrates made during photosynthesis are used immediately, but others are transformed into proteins, lipids, or nucleic acids. When photosynthetic organisms make more organic matter than they need for themselves, that excess is called primary production. The organisms responsible are primary producers, which are the base of the food web. In the ocean, phytoplankton, seaweed, and other autotrophs create massive amounts of primary production, fueling everything from small crustaceans to giant whales. Without them, the marine ecosystems would actually collapse. To convert carbohydrates into other organic molecules, organisms need more than just carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They also require nutrients, like inorganic compounds like phosphates and nitrites. These act like fertilizers in the oceans, helping fuel growth and reproduction. Some organisms even need special elements like silica, which is used to build the shells of diatoms. Just like a garden on land won't thrive without fertilizer, the productivity of the ocean depends on the availability of these nutrients. Where nutrients are abundant, life flourishes. Where they are scarce, growth slows down. All living organisms can be grouped into two major categories based on their cellular structure: prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are the smaller, simpler type which lack a nucleus, while eukaryotes are more complex with DNA enclosed inside a nucleus and many specialized organelles. This distinction might seem small, but it is one of the biggest dividing lines in biology. Everything from bacteria floating in the seawater to whales swimming in the ocean can be understood through this difference. Prokaryotic cells are a simpler, more ancient form of life. They don't have a nucleus. Instead, their DNA is a single circular ring floating in the cell. They also lack most of the organelles that we associate with complex cells. Though they usually have a cell wall, almost all prokaryotes are unicellular or single-celled. Despite their simplicity, they're incredibly successful. Bacteria and archaea dominate many marine environments and play critical roles in recycling nutrients and supporting life in the oceans. Eukaryotic cells are actually more complex. They keep their DNA safely inside of a nucleus and have some specialized organelles that carry out different jobs. Unlike prokaryotes, eukaryotes can be either single-celled like some of the algae and protozoan or multicellular like seaweed, fish, and marine mammals. This complexity allows eukaryotes to form large, diverse, and highly specialized organisms, the kind of life forms we're most familiar with in the ocean. Let's take a closer look at some of those eukaryotic organelles. The nucleus is the control center, housing DNA in the form of chromosomes. The mitochondria are the cell's power plant, carrying out respiration to release energy. The Golgi complex and endoplasmic reticulum handle the packing and transport of proteins. Ribosomes are where proteins are actually built. Plants and algae have chloroplasts, which capture sunlight for photosynthesis. Vacuoles serve as the storage container for water and nutrients. Together, these organelles make cells efficient and adaptable, capable of performing all of the functions of life. Life isn't just about individual cells. It's about how those cells are organized. At the smallest level, we start with atoms, the fundamental units of matter. Atoms join together to form molecules, and different molecules come together to make up cells, the basic unit of life. Within cells, organelles carry out specialized roles. This hierarchy, atoms to molecules to cells to organelles, is the foundation on which larger structures are built. Understanding these levels helps us see the simple building blocks can scale up to something as complex as a living organism. Once we move past the individual cells and organelles, we see how life builds higher levels of organization. Cells work together to form tissues, and different tissues combine to make organs, each with specific jobs. Several organs team up to form an organ system, like the digestive or circulatory system. Finally, all of these systems together carry out a complete organism. This hierarchy explains how something as small as a single cell can scale up into something as complex as a dolphin or a sea turtle. But organisms don't live in isolation. Groups of the same species living in the same area form populations. Different populations together form a community, and when you add the physical environment, like water, rocks, nutrients, and temperature, you get an ecosystem. Thinking in terms of ecosystems helps us understand how marine life interacts with the environment and with each other. It's the big picture of biology, connecting individuals to the entire web of life. Now let's zoom in to the cellular level again and talk about diffusion and osmosis, two processes that control how substances move in and out of the cell. Diffusion is the movement of solutes, which include dissolved substances like salts, from areas where they're more concentrated to areas where they are less concentrated. Osmosis is similar. but it specifically refers to the movement of water, moving from where it's more concentrated to where it's less concentrated. These processes happen naturally and constantly, and they're specifically important in marine environments where salt concentrations are high. Marine environments face special challenges because seawater is full of dissolved salts. Their cells are more constantly at risk of gaining too many solutes and losing water. If the balance shifts too far, cells can shrink, swell, or even die. To survive, marine organisms need to regulate or adapt to these changes. Some allow their internal chemistry to shift with the environment, while others work hard to maintain a stable internal balance. This balance between solutes and water is one of the key struggles of living in the ocean. One strategy is called osmoconformer. These organisms let their internal concentration rise and fall with the salinity of the surrounding water. In other words, they don't try to fight the change. The downside is that most osmoconformers can only survive in environments where the salinity does not vary much. That's why many are found in the open ocean, where conditions are stable, but fewer are found in estuaries where salinity swings dramatically with tides and river input. Another strategy is osmoregulation. Osmoregulators actively control the balance of solute and water inside their bodies. They can secrete very little urine to conserve water or use special glands to pump out excess salts. Because of this, they can tolerate a much wider range of salinities than osmoconformers. For example, many fish are excellent osmoregulators. Some can even move between freshwater and seawater during their life cycles, like salmon. It's an energy-demanding strategy, but it allows them to live in more variable environments. Besides salinity, another major environmental challenge is temperature. Marine organisms handle this in different ways. Ectotherms generate body heat metabolically, but they lose it quickly, so their internal temperatures matches the environment. Think of fish whose body temperature changes with the ocean water around them. Endotherms, on the other hand, retain metabolic heat and maintain a higher, more stable internal temperature. Whales, dolphins, and seabirds are endotherms, which allow them to stay active in cold water where ectotherms might struggle. There's also another way to classify temperature strategies. Poikilotherms have body temperatures that fluctuate with the environment, while homeotherms regulate theirs so it stays relatively stable. Many ectotherms are poikilotherms, and many endotherms are homeotherms, but there are exceptions to that. For instance, some fish can keep parts of their body warmer than the surrounding water, giving them the competitive edge in colder regions. These strategies highlight how flexible life can be when adapting to the changes in the sea. Reproduction is another key to survival, but many marine organisms reproduce asexually. That means offspring are produced by a single parent and are genetically identical to that parent, essentially clones. Asexual reproduction is efficient and allows organisms to quickly increase their numbers. In the oceans, where conditions can be unpredictable, this can be a big advantage because it does not depend on finding a mate. There are many forms of asexual reproduction. Fission happens when one organism splits into two smaller, equal individuals. Budding occurs when small clones grow from the parent and eventually break off. Vegetative reproduction is common in plants. For example, seaweed can send out underground stems called rhizomes that sprout new individuals. These methods can show the creativity of life in finding ways to persist and spread without even relying on sexual reproduction. Of course, many marine organisms reproduce sexually. This usually involves two individuals producing gametes, the egg and the sperm, that unite during fertilization. The offspring are genetically unique, which increases variations in the population. This genetic diversity is really important because it gives populations a better chance to adapt to changing environments. When it's less efficient than asexual reproduction, sexual reproduction provides new raw materials for evolution. In animals, gametes are produced by specialized organs. Ovaries produce eggs, which are generally larger and contain nutrients for the developing embryo. Testes produced by the sperm, which are smaller and more mobile. The union of these two different types of gametes is what creates a new, genetically unique individual. Even in the vastness of the ocean, marine species have evolved ways to bring these gametes together successfully. One common reproductive strategy in the ocean is broadcast spawning. Many marine organisms release their eggs and sperm directly into the water column. For this to work, millions of gametes must be released at the same time to increase the chances of fertilization. Timing is everything. Many species coordinate spawning with tides, moon phases, or water temperatures. Coral reefs, for example, are famous for mass spawning events where the entire reef releases gametes in synchrony, creating a spectacular display. Not all marine organisms rely on chance. Some use internal fertilization, where copulatory organs deliver sperm directly into the female's reproductive tract. This method requires physical contact between individuals, but is more efficient since fewer gametes are wasted. Sharks, marine mammals, and many crustaceans rely on internal fertilization, which often leads to higher survival rates for the offspring compared to broadcast spawning. Some species take flexibility even further by being hermaphrodites. These individuals have both male and female reproductive organs, either at the same time or at different points in their lives. This strategy increases reproduction opportunities, especially in environments where the encounter with mates are rare. Many fish and invertebrates in the ocean can switch sexes depending on conditions. For example, some reef fish start as females and later become males, ensuring the population has enough of both sexes to reproduce successfully. Now that we've talked about reproduction, let's connect it to evolution. Evolution is the gradual change of genetic makeup of a population over time. Because offspring inherit slightly different combinations of genes, populations have variations. Some individuals are better off finding food, avoiding predators, and resisting disease, or producing offspring. Those differences, even if small, make certain individuals more successful. Over many generations, those traits become more common, and the population slowly changes. This process explains the incredible diversity of marine life we see today. Natural selection is a mechanism that drives evolution. It is often summarized as the survival of the fittest, but really it's about which traits give individuals a better chance to survive and reproduce. For those beneficial traits, pass them on more often, while less successful traits fade away. For example, a fish with slightly better camouflage might avoid predators long enough to reproduce, spreading the advantage to future generations. As natural selection continues generations after generation, the gene pool of species changes. Traits that improve survival or reproduction become more common, while harmful traits are reduced. This constant adjustment means populations are always adapting to their environment. It's a slow process, but gives enough time it can produce major changes, and even leading to emergences of entirely new species. The ocean, with its changing currents, temperatures, and predator-prey relationships, provides constant pressures that shape marine life. As a species evolves, biologists need a way to organize and understand them. That's where taxonomy comes in, the science of classifying and naming organisms. Taxonomists use features like body structures, DNA and protein sequences, and even behaviors to determine how organisms are related. They also consider where species live, their habitats, since that often reflects evolutionary history. Taxonomy helps us make sense of the vast diversity of marine life and shows us connections among species. Taxonomy is organized in levels from broad to very specific. We start off with domain, then we move down to kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, then species. Each step down this ladder groups organisms that share more common similarities. The most specific level, species, uses a two-part scientific name, like the Vulpes vulpes, or also known as the red fox. This system, called binomial nomenclature, is universal, meaning scientists around the world use the same names. That consistency is important for communicating about marine organisms, whether they're in California, Japan, or South Africa. A species is defined as a group of individuals that share many characteristics and can successfully breed with another. This is called the biological species concept. If two populations can no longer interbreed, they are considered separate species. This reproduction isolation is a key step in evolution. In the ocean, isolation can happen in many ways. Geographic barriers like deep channels, behavioral changes in mating, or even timing like spawning at different seasons or lunar cycles. Phylogenetics takes taxonomy a step further by asking how are species related through evolutionary history. Scientists build phylogenetic trees or family trees of life using traits like DNA sequences, body structures, fossil records, and even embryonic development. For marine organisms, phylogenetics helps us uncover surprising relationships. For example, whales are more closely related to hoofed animals like hippos than they are to fish, even though they look like fish at first glance. This field constantly reshapes our understanding of how connections among living things.